Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. We're all about helping you to become better leaders on this podcast. Moran43 recently left us a review on iTunes saying this about the podcast. Great content. I love this podcast. As a first-year head coach, the content here is that's SOOOO, valuable. Every episode has something that I can apply right away, and the hosts and guests inspire me to keep trying to do and be better for my players. Love that. Thanks to Moran43, whoever you are. Send me an email. I'll send you some coupons for some free online courses and a couple of books. If you haven't left us a review yet, please do. You can also head on over to tocculture.com to learn more about our mentorship and coaching program for coaches, online courses, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which gives you weekly insights and the notes to each week's podcast. Enough of that. Let's get right into it.
Well, JP, it's that time of year when the coaching carousel is spinning continuously here as coaches get in and out of jobs. They take new positions. Some move their families across the country. Others decide to stay at home and give it another season. And it's a conversation that you and I have had with a number of coaches here between March and May in particular, and one we've never really talked about on the podcast. And so we thought, what a great opportunity here to talk a little bit about how to think about job opportunities. And I think one of the things that is challenging about this whole topic is that bigger is not always better, but sometimes it is. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, but sometimes it is. And sometimes it's better to stay and people are happy. And sometimes people stay and they become miserable, right? And so what we want to kind of kick around this week is, how do you think about job opportunities, whether we should stay, whether we should go, whether we should become a head coach, stay an assistant coach, whatever the opportunity might be. I want to give you a few nuts and bolts of just how to think through various coaching opportunities that might come your way.
Yeah, and I think this conversation really starts with where I really encourage coaches to reflect on when they're considering a new job opportunity. And that's, why do I want to leave? Right? I think, like you mentioned, there's the grass is greener type thing. There's the circumstances would be better potentially at this other school or at this other level. I wouldn't have to worry about my budget. I wouldn't have to worry about, I'd have more people to do all the recruiting or the day-to-day tasks. Or maybe it's not so much about the grass is greener, but there's this like ambition to be at a high level of certain notoriety, to get to the Division I level, to get to the Power 5 conferences, to get to, a 5A, 6A, big time high school, or wherever it is. And I think we really need to explore that why is this, new opportunity of interest to me? What's potentially pulling me in that direction? And I think sometimes, I know that many coaches would have somewhat of an altruistic or a purposeful intention to be at a better opportunity, a higher level. And that's around like influence. Like they want to, they understand that the power and the platform that we have as coaches, and they want to impact more lives. They want to, be potentially like a beacon of transformational leadership or coaching. And I get that. I think that's great. But I come back to what Greg Tonagel from Indiana Wesleyan University said to us in the podcast over 2 years ago about why he stayed at the level that he's been at and hasn't moved into head coaching roles at higher levels in the collegiate level in America. And that was because he was more focused on the depth of his influence and the width of his influence. But, that's always stuck with me. But it doesn't mean that, moving up to a higher level is necessarily a bad thing. But I just want coaches to first step back and reflect and really and identify the why. Like, why am I interested in this new opportunity? Why do I potentially want to leave the current situation that I'm in?
I chuckle a little bit, JP, as you read your list there, because I've never really felt like I had ambition to coach at a higher level or to have better facilities or be in a place where there's more athletes. Like, that just was never really on my radar until basically my life the last 5 years has been living that decision one year after another. And that started when I left Springville after winning a couple state titles. And I think that this is the thing that's also important here when we start getting into our conversation is context does matter. And there is a difference between being a hot coaching candidate, that people are coming to you and they're reaching out to you because they're interested in filling a job with you. You don't even apply and you're getting emails from, athletic directors from across the state. I've been there before. That's a little bit different than being in a place where you're content and you're happy, but maybe there are some other opportunities in the area that intrigue you. And that's different from, as you said in the opener, being fired and feeling a little bit more desperate, in terms of maybe I don't have the best resume right now. Maybe I'm obviously not content in my job because I don't have one anymore. And so there's a desperation that feels a little bit differently, even in that situation. And as I said, I've been in all three of those places here in the last 5 years. And so when I look back at those last 5 years, in 2016, I decided to stay where I was. In 2017, I decided to leave and go to a bigger school. In 2020, I got fired from that position. And then that spring, decided not to take a head job that would have required us relocating to another area, became an assistant coach. And then the following year, thought I was pretty content doing that and had another opportunity come up that turned out to be a great fit at Mount Vernon. And hopefully this is a place that we can live happily ever after for a long time. But I feel like I've been in this place persistently over the last 4 or 5 years, trying to figure out what is the next step.
I think what's unique about your journey, besides the fact that you've moved a lot of places in like the last 5 years, but I think you're probably, from my assessment of knowing you, is that you're probably a little bit more present than the average coach. I think a lot of times people tend to, from my experience, I know my own personal reflection is that, you're often looking for the next thing. And that's a kind of a trending way of thinking or mindset in coaching, is when you get into it, it's like everyone's almost expected. If you want to be a good coach, that means you want to climb this ladder. Right. And some might claim that you don't have ambition. I just think your ambition is probably something a little bit different than just this ambition to climb the ladder. I recently had a coach who was, he's a hot coach. Like everyone wants this guy. I mean, he was probably 10 offers in the span of a month. And it was interesting walking that journey with him, because we were reflecting just the other day on this of, right now, does it just feel really, really good to be wanted because you don't feel appreciated, right? At the moment in your current situation. Or do you really feel called? Do you really feel compelled to move on? Cause I think it was really wrestling with that. And that's a really hard thing to recognize. Is probably at the end of the day, a little bit of both. The current situation, not feeling appreciated. All of a sudden there's 10 schools that, are offering you jobs, and they're, and that process itself is very flattering. They're laying on thick about how amazing they think you are as they want you to go lead their program. And that only lasts, so long. You take the job, you get there, and then you get to work, and before you know it, you lose a few games, and maybe the criticism comes. But it's just kind of difficult to discern, because there is that for people that are being pursued by other schools or other opportunities, that can muddle some of our thinking, I think, at times. Now, Nate, you've been moving fast on that coaching carousel the last 5 years. And I'm sure that with that, maybe there's some mistakes you've made along the way. Maybe there's been some good decisions from your perspective. But if you could go back and give yourself some advice, 5 years ago, what would some of those things be?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I wish I knew when I first started kind of discerning through some of this process that I just learned from experience, I guess, and didn't really maybe ask the right questions in the first couple of times that I went through the decision-making process. And the place that I would start with that is, and you alluded this a little bit earlier, is just being able to reflect on why you have a greater openness to change or to moving, maybe than you did at the beginning when you're at the job that you're at. And what I mean by that is, you take a job, and if things go well and they're happy with you and you're happy with them, that there can be a contentment that settles in. But sometimes that changes after 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And so what changes, right? What can lead to discontent, or just a questioning of like, is there something else? Do I want to do this my whole career? And I think sometimes there can be a trap there. You mentioned before, like when you've been in a place a long time, even if you've been successful, it can feel like you're not appreciated maybe for all the things that you do or that you have done. especially when, as you mentioned, somebody comes in with a phone call or an email that says you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and there's nothing better for their program than for you to come and lead it. And you haven't heard anything like that in years, right? Like at your current job. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not appreciated. And that's something that I learned when I left from Springville, is there was part of me that just wondered, does it even matter that I'm here anymore? Do people still, appreciate all the stuff that we do? And then when I left, it was like, wow, like we did realize the impact when we left, like people really did care, it just wasn't verbalized. It wasn't reinforced. So that was something that I didn't really recognize at the time. I think there's a couple other things that can cause people to be open to looking around. I think one you hear a lot is a new challenge. And I think there's legitimacy to that, right? You're in the same place 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. You learn the league, you get your system in place, like the building, so to speak, is done. And now there's a lot of maintaining a program. And some coaches, like, that's great. We put it in cruise control and we just enjoy year after year. And others, like, all right, well, I'm a builder, I like rebuilding things. I like starting from scratch. I don't really have the opportunity to do that here. I'd like to do it again. That opens the door, right, to thinking about another opportunity. And the last one here that I think is legitimate in a lot of ways is that relationships change. When you're in a place for 7 or 8, 10 years, and you go through a couple assistant coaches and you have a change in administration, and maybe a class that you've been with since they were in 6th and 7th grade, and now all of a sudden they graduate, like those relationships, this is the nature of education and coaching, like people move on and new people come in. And so year 4, 5, 6, you might have had the best staff, the closest staff, and then they kind of move on to other things. And you wouldn't put this on your assistants and say, I can't stand working with you guys, I'm out of here. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily feel the same when those seats change around you. And that could be a legitimate reason to think about a new challenge somewhere else, building new relationships and starting over. So I think just reflecting on what is my appetite for change and why is a really good place to start.
Nate, it's funny you talk about people that would be seeking more challenges in coaching. I think the coaches I talk to find it really challenging wherever they are. But at the same time, yes, you're right. Like we do have this appetite, I think, for more challenges, more unique challenges. And there's many people that like to see themselves as builders, like you said. One thing that really resonated with me that you shared earlier, though, is just this idea that, we don't necessarily recognize how much people do appreciate us. And I remember in both places that I left after having been for 5 years, a long time, one in Ireland, the basketball club I was with, and then even at Notre Dame, after 5 years there, I didn't expect people to be so upset at my leaving. Like I was kind of like, oh yeah, like we're just kind of get used to you, and then all of a sudden you tell people are leaving. And, I remember even just telling my players in Ireland, and a couple of guys ran out of the room crying and didn't want to talk to me for a week until they really like came to grips with it, and it was, caused me to maybe like question, like, oh, did I really make the right decision here? And I think other coaches have had that experience. There's always going to be, when you move on, there's always going to be pain for certain people because you're kind of breaking up with them, is at least what it feels like for them, I think. And that can sometimes, if we have an awareness of how hard it will be for them, I think it'll make it even harder for us to maybe make a move that might be the right move. Or if we do make the move, we start to have second thoughts coming in, like, oh, is this the right decision and stuff? So very, very challenging for sure.
Another question, JP, I wish I would have dug into a little bit more, particularly when I left Springville, was just understanding a little bit more about the school that I was potentially going to move into. In other words, I didn't do a lot of homework on the destination when I first chose to leave. And on the surface, you might think, okay, well, why is this job open? That's a great place to start. And most of the time you're following a coach that has retired, or they've moved on, or they, stepped away from the game, whatever it might be. And sometimes you're going to follow somebody that was fired or that was pushed out, but really trying to understand the culture that you're stepping into, where the program is at, asking a lot of questions, talking to a lot of people, because in contrast with what we talked about in the opener here, the coaches typically look to move up or to make more money or to have more influence or be at a bigger school. Those things are fun, but not necessarily going to be satisfying over the long term if you don't have great fit. If your philosophy doesn't fit with the philosophy of the administration, or that your goals don't fit with the goals of the parents or the players in the program, like things can be difficult. And those are hard things to discern when you're going into or you're investigating about a job. So what did that look like differently for me at Mount Vernon than Lindmar? Well, when I took the job at Lindmar, like I had reached out to a couple coaches in the league just with an email. What do you think about this job? But at the time, I was trying to be a little bit discreet too, because that can be a challenge when you have a job. You don't necessarily want it to get out that you're having conversations with other schools, because that can be a little bit difficult to navigate too. And so I just didn't ask a lot of questions. I didn't talk to anybody that coached at the school or had previously been there. I just didn't know what I didn't know, if that makes sense. Now you fast forward 3 years later, and the opportunity in Mount Vernon comes along. And I mean, I talked to everybody that I knew that was in some way connected to or connected to somebody that was at Mount Vernon, people that had coached there, people that had played there, people that had kids there. I talked to my veterinarian who lived in the community, anybody that I could find that had any kind of ties in the media, in my social circles, in the coaching world to Mount Vernon or the league. I tried to talk to and compare notes on their perspective on the job, because what I was looking for most, which I didn't do necessarily previously, was trying to find, if knowing who I am and trying to learn who they are, if this is really going to be a great fit and a great marriage, besides the fact that, yes, it was going to be a head job in a good league with, good facilities and good athletes. And there's a lot of boxes that were checked from a basketball perspective. But I think I learned in my previous experience that that's not always enough. And that's what I was trying to figure out a little bit more of the background to in this particular situation.
Yeah. And I think back to my own experience years ago. And when I moved to Tennessee, I think it was my ego, which was a big problem. But I never even thought to think of even potentially contacting the former coach and saying, hey, why did you leave? Or if they weren't successful, why weren't you successful? Like learning, like I think there's so much in this process that of learning that serves, benefits in many areas, not just to figure out should you leave, but to what am I going to need to do to be successful if I go there? And one of the things I love about your preparation for Mount Vernon was, I think some of those times people ask those questions, they're fishing around because they want to know all the information that might be helpful for them to get the job. But you weren't just asking questions to figure out, all right, what do I need to know if I want to land this interview? Like interview prep. You were also preparing so that you could interview them. And you were also asking questions to figure, are they right for me? And that's one of the biggest, things I encourage coaches on in the interview process is to not go into this with just like I've got to go prove myself, right? Like I've got to go and put on this front here. It's like go to the interview and ask great questions. Is this the right opportunity for me? And I think doing some of the research before you go into that interview can be helpful, but also knowing the right questions to ask once you're in there can also be extremely beneficial.
Well, JP, as you were sharing there, it reminded me of something that I'm reading in a book by Annie Duke right now called Thinking in Bets. And she's talking about decision making. And one of the things that she identifies when it comes to the variables that affect our ability to be successful, in this case, taking another job, is she encourages people to write down what is the information that you don't know that's going to have an impact on whether or not you can be successful in that position. So just one example, administration. If you have supportive administration, you have a better chance of being successful. But what she identifies in the book is there are things sometimes that will be on that list that you're not going to be able to figure out going into an interview or before you take a job. Like if the athletic director says, look, we love transformational coaching, we love what you're about, but in reality, if you don't win so many games, we're going to move on. Like they may not tell you that in the recruiting pitch, right? If they're trying to sell you on their school. Is that going to matter? Yeah, it's definitely going to matter down the line, but you just may not be able to get a clean read on that. And you have to have a certain level of comfort knowing this is a variable that is unknown, that is going to affect my ability to be successful. Am I comfortable with walking into that situation and learning as I go or not, given what I know about my current job? And I think sometimes, JP, this can be particularly difficult for those of us that come from a perspective of transformational coaching, where, at the core of who I am, I want to use the game of basketball to impact the lives of my players. And on the surface, everybody's going to say, oh, yes, that's exactly what we want here too. But when the rubber meets the road, JP, this is something that I learned, is that there are people out there that don't give a shit about transformational coaching. When push comes to shove, it's winning and losing, or it's my kid playing, and those things are more important than the impact that the sport is having on people. That was news to me.
And personally, I don't think that for myself, that is an essential criteria for a job, right? So I think, people listen to this podcast, if you know that transformational coaching is not the most valued thing by the organization that's trying to hire you, I don't think that's a deal breaker for every coach, right? I think we can still operate within those. But I think it's great to know that, right? I think it's great to know that. And I think, like you said, there's some questions that you can be asking before that you take this job. Why was the previous coach fired or asked to leave or whatever? You can start to look in there. But I've even encouraged coaches, and in myself, I've asked some difficult questions of interviewers, like, well, what are some reasons outside of like legal ones that you would let me go, fire me, like, what are your expectations as far as wins and losses for your coaches within the program here? So I think there's questions we can ask beforehand, even in the interview, to get pretty good transparency around the expectations for you when you take that job. Because I think as long as we, like you said, know those expectations, it's a little bit easier for us to operate in that world.
Now, here's another thing, JP, that I just didn't understand the first couple of times that I went through this. And that's this. Like, if you're leaving problems at your school where you're at, you're going to leave those behind. And then you're going to be introduced to a whole new set of problems that you don't necessarily have a history or an appreciation or an understanding of until you're in that position. What I didn't get was, like, we had great things going at Springville. We had great culture. We had great offensive and defensive systems. Our offseason plan fit, that community and those athletes. Like, we really had found the sweet spot in terms of what we were doing there. And I just thought, oh, we'll just take the plan and we'll implement it at 5A in Linn-Mar with twice as many athletes and a bigger coaching staff and a more vocal parent community and an AAU subculture that's going to impact the way that kids see the game, which I didn't have AAU players when I was at Springville. And I just didn't understand how different the context was going to be. I think our values and principles were still important, but how they manifest themselves was going to have to be different. I didn't understand that. Again, I didn't ask enough questions, right? To learn about the level or to learn about the league and be able to get an idea of just how the puzzle was going to be different. And I think when now being at Mount Vernon, it's a very different situation than both Linn-Mar and Springville, but for lots of different reasons.
Well, what you're talking about right there, Nate, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that I appreciate the coaches that allow me to support them the last 5-6 years here, is because I've now been able to see all these variety of contexts. And so I feel like I have a greater understanding of how certain strategies or principles need to be adapted to the level that they're at, and to the different contexts. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about just a difference in context from like, 1A school to 5A school or Division 3 to Division 1, or, like those are obvious, but even just, rural 1A school versus, a smaller inner city school, like, I mean, just, a private school to a public school. I mean, there's just different circumstances, different contexts, and we have to be able to adapt. The principles and strategies will stay fairly consistent, but the application of those changes. And one of the other things I think is important to mention here that I really struggled with was the relationships, especially if the current place that you're at, you've built up like a lot of credibility and respect and quality, deep, meaningful relationships. When you move on to the next job, you're going back to zero. Right. And that's really, really hard, I think, for me, because the things that you could potentially do or try or, or implement, with your team are probably not going to all work. Right. The way that you discipline, the way that you maybe even run team meetings, like they've had a totally different experience. Right. And you can get away with making mistakes, or like once you've got that credibility relationship, like You can get away with discipline, maybe being a little bit tougher on people and challenging them. But you've got to, when you start a new program, you've got to start with relationships. You got to build those from scratch. That's a process that takes a lot of time. So not only, will the stuff that you were doing in the former team not work as effectively in that situation, but it's also like, it's just, I mean, it's tough work, right? And you're gonna miss that place where you walked in to a gym and there was instant connection, and all of a sudden you're going back in there, you're like the new kid at school. Like it's difficult to step into that. So just another thing to consider if you are looking at new opportunities.
I think the issue of relationships, JP, is maybe for many of us the number one factor when it comes to your job satisfaction or finding contentment. We can go through a challenging situation or some tough seasons if the relationships are there, right? Whether it's with administration or your coaches, your players. And when I talked to TJ Rosine, just as an example, during this process for me, and asked him, why have you never left Emmanuel? He's had all kinds of opportunities to move up or move on. And he comes back to, at the end of the day, I love the people that I work with. And when I think about the unknown about, I could have an administrator that understands my schedule and needs and family and the way I want to coach, as well as my current AD, but I'm not sure about that, or I'm going to have to inherit a staff, but I love the guys that I work with here, or I'm going to recruit a different kind of athlete or whatever it might be. Like there's that constant contrast between what I know in my relationships and I love the people I'm with. And for him, that's the most important thing and has kept him from taking the leap, into a different situation. But let me give you the counter argument to that, because another friend of the pod that I talked to during this process was Boomer Roberts, and Boomer, when he left and took the job at Trinity International, left a great situation out at Vanguard in California, perennial Final Fours, all that type of stuff. And he told me, because I said, look, when I left Springville, we had a junior class that I've been with since they were in fourth grade, kids that I love and, still talk to a lot today. Do I want to leave those guys? And Boomer said, Nate, if you've done it right, there's never a good time to leave. I was like, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, look, if those kids graduate, it's not like you don't love the next class. You've been with them just as long. Like if you do it right and you have those great relationships around you, there's never going to be a good time where you're like, oh, there's only a-holes coming up. I guess now's the right time for me to leave, if you do it right. And I thought in a lot of ways that set me free a little bit to be more open to the idea of being called somewhere else, because he's right. There isn't ever going to be a group of kids that come up and I say, well, I don't love these guys, or I don't necessarily want to work with these guys. And I think the other thing, JP, I would say in my experience here after being at Northland for a year and now being in Mount Vernon, is there is some excitement to building those new relationships as well, and thinking about it. On the one hand, you're exactly right. It's hard. You start from zero. I mean, I think about, we just went past my 1 year anniversary of taking the job at Mount Vernon, and where our relationships are now compared to just meeting those kids a year ago is night and day. And it was hard and it was it was uncomfortable at times, given the way that we want to coach. But now it's incredibly satisfying, thinking about where we're at going into year two. So I don't want that to just be a discouragement of, where you're at. Don't ever leave those relationships, because there can be good on the other side. But again, it comes back to this idea of eyes wide open, right? And understanding it's not going to be easy to start over again.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that I would encourage coaches to do if you're facing some sort of decision here is, I think the traditional things, the pros and cons list, right? Like, oh, what's the pros here? What's the cons? I actually encourage coaches to make two lists. One is, what do I need to be successful in this job? And what do I need to do to be successful in the next job? And really kind of outline the process. That's success as far as potentially wins and losses. That's success as well as impact and influence that you want to have. But to really, list those things out. And be as detailed as you possibly can, largely from like the day to day, like what will my life look like, as I pursue success here, and what would it look like over here? And what I think you get at the end of the day there is a bit clearer picture of what your life might look like in that context. And when you do that, I think you have clarity. And I was challenged recently enough by Jerry Lynch, friend of the podcast as well. And he challenged me. He said, JP, you've built your life around your work, not your work around your life. And that's always stuck with me. And I think so often we get so caught up in this chasing, different things in coaching, the climbing the ladder, that we lose sight of the life that, we really want for ourselves and for our family. And so when you look at, okay, do I want to, pursue this bigger opportunity, this high level, program, whatever it is? Well, okay, yeah, you could be successful. You might have the capabilities, you might have the potential, you might have the talent as a coach, whatever. But is that really that road to success? Is that really the life you want for yourself and for your family? And I think it's so profound that, Jay Wright, the head coach of Villanova, stepped down from his job. And I think it's, based upon some comments that have come out, is that, his life, he kind of lost control of it. Everything had been about the job, and that he was just ready to step away. And I think that that's really, really profound. And I think if more coaches did this activity of comparing, what do I need to do to be successful here or in another opportunity, I think we'd see actually more coaches, maybe step down into maybe down a division, down a level, because they're just like, you'd actually start to create more space in your life as you pursued, success, and I'm not trying to discourage people anyway there, but I just think it's a good reflection activity.
After going through this 4 or 5 times now in the past few years, I want to kind of leave us with the 3 most important questions I wish I would have had the first time that I went through this process. So question number 1 is, what do I enjoy most about coaching? When I got fired and I had the opportunity to become a volunteer assistant, or maybe to pursue some head positions, which would require relocating our family, blah, 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 the question really became, I had to understand what I enjoyed most about coaching to figure out if, for lack of a better way to say it, if I could be an assistant coach and work for somebody else. And so through the process of kind of discerning that, what I landed on for me was the most important thing is the relationships that I build with athletes. And I can do that as an assistant coach. But I needed to wrestle with that for a while to figure out, what do I enjoy most? What gives me the most fulfillment in coaching? The second question that is, I think, critically important when it comes to staying or going is understanding, just being real honest with yourself, with your family. What am I chasing and why? It's not wrong to chase better facilities and better athletes and a better league and more money or a higher level job. None of those things are evil in and of themselves. But why? There are some coaches that say, look, I want to climb the ladder so we can be financially stable. My wife can stay home, or she had the freedom to do whatever. That's totally legitimate. And that's understanding your why. But I think too often we can chase shiny objects. We can see somebody else in a different situation and say, oh, I wish that was me, without really understanding why. Why is it that I'm looking to leave? Why is it that I'm chasing this thing? That's an important question. And the last one, JP, and I know this maybe isn't for everybody here, but I remember talking to, TJ again, asking him, why didn't you ever leave Emmanuel? And I think at the end of the day, whether it's pros and cons or a success list or what am I chasing, for a certain number of coaches out there, if your faith is part of the equation, one of the things that was really important to me was getting to a place where I would be willing to say, I can stay, I'm willing to stay, and I'm willing to go. I just want to know which one I'm supposed to do. And that may seem like semantics, but I think a lot of times when we feel like we're trying to leave a job, we lean a little more heavier to, I want to find another place to go, without necessarily wrestling with, is that the right thing for me? And sometimes we get so anchored in a place for whatever reason that we miss opportunities that maybe doors are opening for us for a reason, but we aren't open to it because we're not willing to do either one. And so when it's come to finding peace and finding discernment for us, that's really where we try to land, is a place where I'm willing to stay, I'm willing to go. And then my prayer is, just make it obvious which one we're supposed to do.
All right, that's it for this week. Next week, we've got Daniel Coyle, the New York Times bestselling author of The Talent and Culture Code. Episode 53 and 54, we actually discussed this book. That's years ago. Well, now he's coming on this pod. And I know he's been on some other podcasts recently to promote his new book, The Culture Playbook. But I think we've got a really, really special, interesting episode with Coyle. So be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss it. Thanks again for listening in.